This is the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.
What I'm saying is so silly. It's that turn down the air conditioning to turn down the temperature on the air conditioning, which is turning up the air conditioner. I'm sorry, I'm being silly. It's also what I don't understand about everything's downhill from here. Going down a hill is easy. So it's less labor intensive. It's like, it's cool. It's easy street. But no, if you're going downhill, everything's getting worse, right?
Except it's terrible on your knees going downhill, walking, running.
I was of course thinking of driving.
Driving.
You go to running, I go to driving. How funny.
I did have a moment leaving work the other day. School was situated on top of a big hill, and I was heading for the gas station, and I was on the low, and I found out later that when I filled up my tank all the way to full, I had about 3 miles left in the tank, but was able to coast all the way down and felt great not burning a drop, just letting her rip and having to ride the brakes to make sure I was able to stick to the 35 mile an hour speed limit.
Oh my gosh.
I was thinking it's all downhill from here.
It's all downhill from, yeah, it's good. It's easy street. And I like how also you didn't speed. That's really good. You remind me of a friend of ours who won't jaywalk. Even if it's midnight in DC and no one is around, this person insists on waiting for the little green man to come on to tell him he can cross the street. Come on now.
Reverence for the laws.
Yeah. Law abidingness. Well, speaking of laws,
yes,
that work and don't work, Federalist Paper number 9 is what we're going to talk about today, aside from your escapades at the gas station. The utility of the Union as a safeguard against domestic faction and insurrection. How does this paper feel to you in comparison with what we've seen in 1 through 8?
So it starts off on a familiar note about a firm union. A firm union will be of the utmost moment to the peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection. I want to pick up on a note that you have emphasized in these conversations. It's not that simply a union will be of the utmost moment. It's that a firm union will be of the utmost moment. We can't simply have the union of the Articles of Confederacy. We have to have the firm union of the Constitution with energy. It does feel, moving forward, when our last papers were really about the internal politics of the Confederacy, that this paper sets off on a departure. We have a note looking back to the past about the petty republics of Greece and Rome, and thereafter Publius announces the developments of a new political science, or at least an improved political science. So we're stepping away from the bloodshed and chaos of America without union, and now we're looking toward some broad themes of political science before we step toward a new development.
Yeah, I think we're in picking up what you're putting down. I think we're headed up, if I could use that language and that way of thinking about it. Now we're talking about peace and liberty, not just peace. You need security to then have liberty, of course. But here it's on the page as you read it to us. It's in the opening words. So we're moving up into peace and liberty, and the enemy of peace and liberty, domestic faction and insurrection. So those are the 2 poles we have here.
Would it be too blithe to say that this paper, after all of the horror and the carnage, is going to tell us that, in fact, we can have nice things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think this is a turning point, is what I'm getting at. I feel like, 1 through 14 form a chunk, in my opinion, and I feel like right now the clouds are sort of clearing. So Publius is here to correct the logic of the anti-feds and of many of the American people at this point. They like the Union, most of the American people. Publius has relied on this ancient understanding. They have the conclusions right. They just don't understand how to get there. They don't understand union and the way Publius is going to teach it to us in 9, especially 10 as well. Publius discusses the petty republics of Greece and Italy. So we're going back into the history books yet again. Publius is showing us something of his learnedness, also of his political science. which is informed by studying histories. And he looks back to Greece and Italy. What do you think of this scene? Would you like to go there? Is there anything admirable in these petty republics of antiquity?
Maybe go through and give a list of words that haven't appeared in other Federalist papers. Horror, disgust, vibrating, tyranny, anarchy, furious storms, I know that's two. Felicity, tempestuous waves of sedition and party rage. We are thrown as back and forth between different emotions, between different forces, between different political prospects, as were those petty republics of Greece and Italy, perpetually vibrating between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. And I have to imagine an American reader, maybe one with anti-federalist inclinations, would read this paragraph and be maybe horrified at the mentions of the petty republics of Greece and Italy, if not to Athens and maybe Sparta, but surely Rome, if the reference is there. Where are we to look for a model for Republican government?
A Republican government's tempestuous. It's vibrating, as you've said. Those words are not the words of stability. And I want stability. That is to say, I want peace because I want liberty. So all of these words you've drawn to our attention from this incredible paragraph here in Federalist 9 are showing us when you think Republican government throughout human history, you think of tyranny and anarchy and movement, not tranquility, not calm, not the Pacific Ocean. So this is a remarkable image. How could anyone possibly salvage Republican government? This allows me to say something very simple. The petty republics of Greece and Italy show Republican government to be antithetical to liberty. Very simple. Free government and Republican government aren't the same thing, given this paragraph. But there's also something else that's happening that maybe we could pine for. There are momentary rays of glory. Did you track all of the positive things that seem to? They're brief. They're Roman candles. They're just simply amazing. Wow, that's so pretty, and then they just fade out. And instead of just merely fading out, actually, they're overrun by blood and gore and violence. Intervals of felicity open themselves to view. When we see them, we regret what we're seeing because we know that they're only going to last for a minute. It's incredible. Rays of glory through the gloom. They dazzle us with a transient and fleeting brilliancy. I don't want anything that's transient and fleeting. I want to plant orange trees. I want to be here to farm, to build a life and a family, and so on and so forth. Stable government is an aspect of good government. We don't have that here. Is he loading the dice at all? Is this just rhetorical mumbo jumbo, or is this what you see when you study Livy, when you study your Plutarch, any of those guys? Is this what you see?
Livy at least seems to draw a different conclusion on the decline of Rome, finding the seeds of Rome's decline in the decline of virtue. And virtue, it doesn't seem, according to Publius, that there has been an improvement in the science of virtue or an improvement in the morals of man that could attend and lend support to a more stable republic. If the anti-federalists think that human nature is maybe improving, or that Republican virtue in simple backwoods America could be the foundation of political stability in America, Publius is, to say the least, unimpressed. If momentary rays of glory break from the gloom, while they dazzle us with a transient and fleeting brilliancy, there are your Roman candles. They at the same time admonish us to lament that the vices of government should pervert the direction and tarnish the luster of those bright talents and exalted endowments for which the favored soils that produce them have been so justly celebrated. We're talking here about great men, and we might think of Alcibiades or Caesar or Pompey or Cato, men who, maybe like Cato, were noble but were cut down in bloodshed, men like Caesar able to erect a revolution in their politics. The republic has to be able to, if these great men come about, redirect them. Publius says the vices of government pervert their direction. It needs to be able to redirect them into more stable, more productive pursuits that are more productive of stability and happiness. Instead, you will have ambition constantly overrunning the state. And then maybe there's another option besides trying to redirect the ambitions of great men, is to arrange institutions such that they cannot emerge.
Yeah, ostracism in the old-fashioned way doesn't seem to be an option. Publius wouldn't, it seems, advocate for that. However, we can do some institutional shackling or constraining of these people, and hopefully also still be able to allow them to flourish. That seems like a paradox. How is it that you can constrain a great human being and nonetheless have that human being still be great? Well, we'll get to that in due course, but what we know is that the presidency is seemingly elastic, because Publius ends this second paragraph with the following sentence, and I think it shows there is still something admirable of great human beings there. And this would be something like the Republican principle. Republican government and allowing movement of human beings from various stations through the ranks is a nice way of saying, look, the cream can rise to the top. Those blessed by nature with some sort of virtue can still move and ascend.
Without getting too far ahead of ourselves here, we can look, and even if we loathe him and think him dangerous to the Republic, we look at a figure like Jackson and see how he entered the presidency from outside the establishment and was able to be institutionalized thereby. He did break some ordinary shackles that previous presidents had abided by, but he governed for the prescribed 8 years and then moved on. And a figure like him, who might have been denied access to political office in one of the petty republics, or who would have been opposed by the sword in a less stable system, the country is able to ride him out, or, if you will, enjoy the benefits of his presidency. And these outsider figures, and it is November 10th, 2024, right? These outside figures are allowed a way to come in, spend their time, and then walk off the stage.
Let me say one thing very briefly. The treatment of the petty republics of antiquity here in 9 is an incomplete treatment in terms of the whole of the Federalist Papers. If one were interested in trying to gather Publius's understanding of them, one would do well to look at 9 to be sure, but also 63. I don't think it serves our current purposes for us to hop over to 63. We're just trying to plod through these things, but that would be my recommendation. The picture in 9 is incomplete, but it completely serves Publius's present purposes. Namely, you need union to control faction and domestic insurrection. So looking at 9, what about this wonderful paragraph here? From the disorders that disfigure the annals of those republics, the advocates of despotism have drawn arguments not only against the forms of republican government, but against the very principles of civil liberty. They have decried all free government as inconsistent with the order of society, and have indulged themselves in malicious exultation over its friends and partisans. Happily for mankind, stupendous fabrics reared on the basis of liberty, which have flourished for ages, have in a few glorious instances refuted their gloomy sophisms. Gloom persists now, but the gloomy sophisms are by those advocates of despotism who are haters of liberty. That is to say, these monarchists. Is that right, Aaron? Is that who you understand those people? It's got to be the monarchists, right?
Yeah, and therefore not a significant political problem in Publius's America. Right? This paper does not have to be addressed to monarchists trying to win them over. Americans might have recognized in the Constitution, in the executive branch, some king-like office, but this wasn't to win over a monarchist segment in American politics. No. I think the purpose rhetorically of this movement against monarchism is to bring out civil liberty. We can create a government that is not a petty republic and raise to the fore the question of civil liberty. Happily for mankind, stupendous fabrics reared on the basis of liberty. We can talk about which ones those are going to point us to a more stable direction. A government that is able to secure civil liberty through, in the next paragraph, the improvements on political science learned reared or studied from these stupendous fabrics.
Right. We still have work to do. Just because there are some stupendous fabrics out there does not mean that we can just say, Republican government, go. We need to do more work. The next paragraph, this is the most famous paragraph of Fed 9, has Publius announcing his improved political science. How about I read and you help me think about it? But it is not to be denied that the portraits they have sketched of Republican government were too just copies of the originals from which they were taken. If it had been found impracticable to have devised models of a more perfect structure, the enlightened friends of liberty would have been obliged to abandon the cause of that species of government as indefensible. The science of politics, however, like most other sciences, has received great improvement. The efficacy of various principles is now well understood, which were either not known at all or imperfectly known to the ancients. I'm going to stop there. It's an improved political science. So there are principles which we understand now that either the ancients were ignorant of wholly or just only knew partially or imperfectly. I've heard it argued by some people that this is not a wholly new political science because something of the understanding of liberty persists. And these will be people who want to talk something about natural law thinking, moving through natural right thinking. Therefore, it's an improvement on it because the core principle is the same. Now, whether we find that convincing, I just at least wanted to throw that out there as to how it is that this is not a wholly new political science, cutting an entirely new cloth and then draping government in it. That's my understanding of this here.
This is still a republic he's announcing. It just happens to be a new and improved one.
And you wouldn't, without these improvements, you wouldn't want a Republican government. Without these, why would you want it? We just characterized it as a place full of horror and all kind of movement and the occasional bright light or bright ray. Thank goodness for these improvements. And I'll start reading them now. Here are the improvements Publius offers to make Republican government good government. The regular distribution of power into distinct departments, the introduction of legislative balances and checks, the institution of courts composed of judges holding their offices during good behavior, the representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election. These are either wholly new discoveries or have made their principal progress towards perfection in modern times. They are means and powerful means by which the excellencies of Republican government may be retained and its imperfections lessened or avoided. And then here comes the fifth improvement. To this catalog of circumstances that tend to the amelioration of popular systems of civil government, I shall venture, however novel it may appear to some, to add one more on a principle which has been made the foundation of an objection to the new Constitution. I mean the enlargement of the orbit within which such systems are to revolve, either in respect to the dimensions of a single state or to the consolidation of several smaller states into one great confederacy. So that's the fifth improvement.
Some of these are very obviously institutional arrangements. The first, the regular distribution of power into distinct departments. So the legislative power being one power, the executive power being another, the judicial another, will be divided. And therewith they will limit government. The introduction of legislative balances and checks. Although I guess those are two different things, separation of function and legislative checks and balances.
Yeah, so it's bicameralism. Legislative checks and balances here shows us the legislature doesn't even possess its power unchecked. It doesn't wholly possess it, so we've cut it up a little bit and spread it around. But what we're seeing now, look at just the two things that you've pointed to, Aaron, and let's think about how they can start to remedy the problems we read about from the petty republics of antiquity. The word that I would use to characterize those petty republics of antiquity is motion, movement. And I don't like that. I want stability. And now here we are reading about the separation of powers, the regular distribution of power in two distinct departments. That's the separation of powers. And then second, the introduction of legislative balances and checks. That's bicameralism. So those two things are going to bring us stability. If I'm reading the Federalist Papers naively. I don't quite understand that yet. I need to see how those gears turn and this machine works. But I at least am an enlightened enough friend of liberty to assume that that's what Publius is doing here.
And I think through our conversations on the Federalist that this is the first time Publius has announced that there are going to be limits on majorities. So that majorities in Congress cannot act on any whim, right? You have to have, in some cases, large majorities. We haven't announced that yet, but it's pretty clear from balances and checks, from separation of function, that we are going to be placing limits on what an empowered majority can do.
And these enlightened friends of liberty, maybe they've read their Montesquieu, and we know that we see these two improvements in Montesquieu's Political Science in the Spirit of Laws, Book 11, where we see a separation of powers and bicameralism there. There's a separate House and a separate Senate. So it's all slowing down, and there in Montesquieu, it's in order to make for liberty, political liberty. And here, what do you know? The very first sentence of Fed 9, peace and liberty. So Publius is taking what's available to him and making it into good government.
And let's continue walking through the improvements. The third refers to an independent judiciary, the institution of courts composed of judges holding their offices during good behavior. So judges who we do not elect like we do in the state of Maryland. Judges who are going to be appointed and will hold their office not according to the whims, by the way, of a Democratic majority.
And so that's the big thing, because we already have the regular distribution of power into distinct departments. Your elucidation of that point was to offer us separate legislative, separate executive, separate judiciary. So what then is the point of this third improvement? What is really hammered home? Tenure. So that means that these aren't political puppets, that the judiciary should be removed from politics, from the people. These are undemocratic moves, making government more Republican.
As modern progressives will say, undemocratic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we might say, yes, right? Of course. Didn't we just talk about the petty republics, right? Which were democracy. More democratic than this one.
And this point, I really would hope anyone would wiggle in their chair at hearing this. Publius is going to be very good on this at Fed 10. It's probably why we're going to spend like 3 episodes on Fed 10, just because there's such a massive treatment of democracy at the end. And so you and I now can see the people's power is going to be lessened in terms of what they can do with government, because now everything's all chopped up. And we've got a chopped up separation of powers. We've got bicameralism. And now you've got some judges who don't even live on the same plane of earth that we live on. They're so far removed from us. Now I can't help but wonder, Publius has been saying this, right? We're the problem. The problem of petty republics of antiquity is not simply their political science was bad. It's that their political science was bad because it did not address these tendencies in human beings when it comes to power. Lord Acton's here to tell us absolute power corrupts absolutely. And all we're doing now is chopping, removing power. Hence the fourth one, getting away from democracy. The representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election. That's just straight representative government. So now there's a gap. Everything is going to be removed, refined, simply because he's representing a larger population, more people. I'm not going to say too much about it because I'll start explaining this in light of Fed 10, and that's not fair. Do you think, is there something else in the representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election? Notice it's in the legislature.
Not in the executive, not in the judiciary. I wonder what deputies means. We can go here into theories of representation. Is a deputy supposed to act on my instructions, or is a deputy supposed to exercise his best judgment?
As we proceed through the Federalist Papers, he develops a robust sense of responsibility that's considerably more complex than you say jump, the deputy says how high. deputy, at least, doesn't it elicit the image of you being sovereign and then you're deputizing someone? As I think through the word, that's what comes to my mind. It underlines that the people are the legitimacy here, and they are therefore granting this power to someone else. So
It's usually someone lower than you.
Right. So it makes the removal of this power of direct democracy less stingy. Wholly new discoveries or have made their principal progress towards perfection in modern times. So there's some stuff the ancients didn't know about, some stuff they did know about. Yeah, they knew about representation, but not separation of powers.
There's something missing from this list. I mean, we want to read the Federalist naively, but we also shouldn't pretend like we haven't. Is there something? Well, I'm thinking of one big thing. Are you thinking of anything missing from this list?
Well, I want to hear what you have to say first. I'm
The
interested in
executive. An executive somewhat elected from the people, somewhat not, who is independent, whose job it is to execute the laws. A semi-monarchical office who can be withdrawn by the people. Certainly an invention in political science.
And what would be the disadvantage of announcing the executive
And
in this paper?
the same disadvantage, if I may, of not naming England as the stupendous fabric from which we can learn lessons of political science. It will upset some readers.
Yeah, I'm not ready to hear about this guy, this executive, because those bright talents that we discussed in the previous paragraphs, those guys are going to look a lot like the executive, I think. I mean, that's at least who we would hope to have occupy that office. You and I know, of course, that the separate executive is in the regular distribution of power into distinct departments, but Publius has not outlined that yet for us before.
It can be difficult to read Fed 9 as a modern reader and not, I suppose, take for granted that these actually are innovations in political science. Right? An independent judiciary, checks and balances within the legislature, separation of powers, enlargement of the orbit, that these are new.
Yeah, and I think we can see representation. Certainly, we know it existed previously, but those are new. Yeah, that's right. And these are announced by Publius in an effort to bring the enlightened friends of liberty on board his Republican project. Republican government can be good. It can secure liberty. So when you look at the paragraph and see the way it's structured, that's clearly his audience. That's who he's targeting.
Think of all the terrible lessons that Americans would have learned about Republican government in the 1770s and the 1780s. Debt forgiveness, failure to pay Washington's army, trampling on the rights of American citizens. Great. We have solutions for you here.
So let me loop back now at this point, Aaron, because you said something when you announced the executive is missing from here. I want to also suggest there is no meditation on the ends of government. There's no correction of our understanding of the purpose, ends, goals of government. They're taken for granted. The prudent statesman Publius is here to discuss means. And I'm using the word prudent because I'm thinking of Aristotle Nicomachean Ethics, Book 6. You don't deliberate about ends, you deliberate about means. And what we're deliberating about here are the means of securing good government, which is one that keeps us safe through peace and also free. So these improvements are really important because they are the means that Publius offers us. So let's talk about this final one. This is the one that Publius really primes us for. This is the one that a lot of people are going to say is novel. It's the foundation of an objection to the new Constitution. I mean the enlargement of the orbit within which such systems are to revolve, either in respect to the dimension of a single state or to the consolidation of several smaller states into one great confederacy. Look, the language, this language of revolve.
Yeah, it's celestial or extraterrestrial.
It's cosmic.
Yeah, it's high, as you said at the beginning.
Yeah, it's high. Yeah, this will be something that some of the progressives will really latch onto, this way of thinking about things. These guys were in a Newtonian universe with all these things that were distinct from each other and just never touched. Whereas they're Darwinians, I'm thinking here of Woodrow Wilson. They're Darwinians. Everything touches. It has to evolve. It has to change in order to survive. Here, in order to survive and not just get murdered in the factious struggle between some guy named Pompey and some guy named Caesar, I need things to slow down, stay in their place, and move in an orderly and regular fashion. And now, separating powers, bicameralism, tenured judges, representation, all of that makes for stability. What else are we doing? We're making it bigger. And simply by making it bigger, let's just continue to use natural images. If there's rough waters out there that are going to toss your ship of state to and fro, wouldn't you like to be on a much larger boat so the waves don't seem anywhere near as gigantic? It's a beautiful image. And yet it's the one that people are saying is novel. And they're also saying it is objectionable. Big is bad for the anti-feds. Publius is here to teach us big is good, small is bad. Those petty republics of antiquity were small and they were full of motion. Their ships of state were thrown around and to the bottom of the ocean with the slightest storm.
He's saying the anti-federalists don't understand Montesquieu. In interpreting Montesquieu to mean that a republic had to be small, he says that they misunderstand his comments about confederacies. A confederacy can be large. It ought to be large. It's the constituent parts of it which must be small. Makes you wonder about large states. A republic of this kind, able to withstand an external force, in paragraph 11, may support itself without any internal corruption. The form of this society prevents all manner of inconveniences. So we're not achieving a consolidation through this new constitution, and we're not going against Montesquieu, the oracle. Here I am in paragraph 17, the proposed constitution, so far from implying an abolition of the state governments, here he is addressing the fear of consolidation that the anti-federalists raise, makes them constituent parts of the national sovereignty by allowing them a direct representation in the Senate and leaves in their possession certain exclusive and very important portions of the sovereign power. This fully corresponds in every rational import of the terms with the idea of a federal government. And its size, its largeness, actually makes it more stable.
That's right, because Publius is going to, throughout the remainder of 9, attack this mistaken notion that big territory, where there's a lot of diversity, is the enemy of democracy. He's going to show actually that large territory wherein there's a lot of diversity is the friend of democracy. The anti-feds don't understand that the city-states and ancient republics were smaller than any state in the Union. So right there's a misapplication of this aspect of Montesquieu and history to Virginia, which is way bigger. So even Rhode Island is larger than Athens in its prime, for crying out loud. So what are you guys, Rhode Island, that we could walk across in the amount of time we've had this conversation? I'm kidding, but come on. And so they can't have it their way. And also, what would be the option? Oh, okay, so everything's already too big for the anti-feds. Well, let's make everything smaller. Well, didn't we worry about that so much in Federalist Papers 3, 4, and 5? Not having a union and just having a series of small states, like that's no good. So Publius seems to imply that the smallest of the American states which is Rhode Island, is actually the most corrupt here. That the small size is the enemy of liberty. So Rhode Island's nowhere near as virtuous as the anti-feds would have it. So if we were to follow Montesquieu, Publius tells us, we couldn't try anything other than a monarchy in America. So thank goodness for enlarging the orbit in a separation of power schema where there's checks and balances, tenure judges, and representation.
There's a parting shot at equal representation as a key element in a Confederate republic. He looks to the Lycean Confederacy, which did give larger votes to smaller states, and says, Montesquieu says that were I to give a model of an excellent Confederate republic, it would be that of Lycia. So the concern of the anti-federalists that the smaller states must have equal representation with the small. like Virginia, is thrown out the door. If you love Montesquieu so much, let me show you what he's actually saying. And then he does throw away the idea in a confederacy that the National Council ought to have no concern with any object of internal administration. Actually, that may be necessary. There is no absolute rule on the subject, is as far as he seems willing to go.
Yeah, he says it's more a subtle point than it is an accurate point, the distinction between confederacy and consolidation. The more accurate definition of a confederacy is that it's an assemblage of societies, It's nothing more. Hence, the proposed constitution fits. So what we can see here in Fed 9 at the end of the day is that we have these improvements in the science of politics that are pitched, I want to say this again, to the enlightened friends of liberty. That's the audience he addresses here. And these enlightened friends of liberty, as enlightened, like models. They like forms, to use the language that Professor Mansfield might use. They seem to be non-Republican discoveries that are amenable to Republican government. The distinction between consolidation and confederacy that we were just discussing is erroneous. It doesn't do anything. The new Constitution, though, the proposed one, fits with confederacy insofar as the perspective at this point is unity, peace, liberty, the suppression of faction and insurrection. So Publius can advance this argument, again, on those narrow terms. And then when he looks at it from a different angle later, we're going to, of course, discuss the matter differently. But that's it here. And that's pretty much what I have to say about Fed 9. I think it's really fun also to take the 5 improvements and then track them through the papers.
We have institutional arrangements. Now he's going to continue to explicate them. I mean, when we were beginning, we prophesied that the Federalist had 2 main goals. One, to explain to citizens how this Constitution was supposed to work, and thereby to convince them that it was worthy of ratification. And second, to offer a civic education to the Americans. This is an essential paper, I think. If you just want to, if you had to assign one Federalist paper to explain the uniqueness of American government, I mean, one paragraph in one paper, paragraph 4 of Federalist 9, might be essential.
Yeah, that's a tough, that's a jam that you put somebody in by saying you can only have one paragraph. I mean, of course you would race to 51 with separation of powers there. It'd also be a lot of fun just to talk about 49 in this case as well, just because that paper is so much fun. Man, there's so many good ones. There's brilliant stuff in 37. I like 57 a lot. Why not look at 78 while we're at it? There's so much work that you could do here. I don't know why you want to do me like that and only give us one paragraph, Aaron. But it is important. And we have to see that he's diagnosing problems. And that's another aspect. That's why this is a science. This is government that might be able to be founded on reflection and choice as much as possible. And we're being called into the workshop to reflect on human misery, human fallibility, and failed governments. And upon those reflections, we are open, especially because we are enlightened friends of liberty. Do we have a spirit of enlightenment about us that can do spirit? That through reason, through learning, we can actually overcome some of the problems that have beset human beings since time immemorial? Yeah, let's go. We've got these 5 improvements here. Let's get to work. It's not a new political science. That's Tocqueville. A new political science for an age altogether new. That's Tocqueville, Democracy in America. This is an improvement. And so that's also a nice way to make me a little less nervous about what's happening, because they're just improvements. The principle, the ends stay the same. It's not something wholly new that's going to fill us, since I brought up Tocqueville, with religious terror, like Tocqueville says in the intro of Democracy in America. Instead, this is something that should make sense. It's a gradual unfolding, and it still nonetheless should stir my excitement about it and attachment to it. So I think that's part of the civic education here.
Well, we're certainly at danger of recording 3 or 4 or 5 hours on Federalist 10. I want to add that we've already done so for a different series. So
And we
maybe
went so quickly there too. I mean, that's what's absurd. In my opinion, we went so fast. And I
Yeah.
think we recorded an hour and 45 minutes,
Yeah.
give or take.
Not only go so fast, we didn't get past the 5th paragraph.
I don't know. It's not a bad thing.
No, I agree.
But you're right. No, okay, I hear you. So maybe what we should just do is say, okay, well, let's just do an hour per paragraph in Fed 10. How many paragraphs are in that demon? Quite a few. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. There are 23 paragraphs in Fed 10. It's so funny to research numerology because you get some real whack. I mean, it should be enough to keep me from ever playing around with it, because anytime you Google it, first of all, I can tell you your horoscope because I just Googled it. And, it's that sort of stuff. It really is some wackadoo stuff. Hey, have you seen that movie, A Serious Man, that Coen Brothers movie?
No.
Well, the whole movie is about a man looking for meaning. I mean, in so few words, he says, what does it all mean? And he asks a young, a middle-aged, and an old rabbi. And he's a physicist, this man who's having this crisis. And when he goes and speaks with the middle-aged rabbi, the rabbi tells him a story about a dentist whom they know, who saw things engraved on the inside of a goy's teeth. And it said something like, help me, save me. It's a wonderful scene. It's got Jimi Hendrix playing over it, but he does some numerology. He takes each of the letters, of course, which has a numerical value in Hebrew, and gets a phone number. And it's some grocery store. I can't remember the name of the grocery store, but let's just say it's a Piggly Wiggly because that's funny. It's a Piggly Wiggly in Des Moines. So he drives there. And it's just a normal Piggly Wiggly. But it's a great scene. The end of it is not merely the fun numerology that's absolutely meaningless, is that the advice offered by the rabbi is just let the mystery be. It's okay. You don't have to have the answers. There's Hebrew words on the inside of a man's bottom row of teeth. Just, crazy stuff happens. Yeah, you should see this movie, but it's not squash, Aaron. I know. I like how you have to be up. It's 7:44. You have to. What time are you getting? Are you getting up at 4:30 or 5?
I'm getting up at 4:45.
My God. I mean, people in the military are still asleep.
So
when you're getting up.
I've said this before. Probably my most impressive professional achievement, given that I am fond of hitting the snooze button, was having, I think, 40 a.m. practices last year and never being late to a single one. It's just hard, man. 4:45. It's daylight savings time and the sun won't be out.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I love waking up early and getting work done. I'm not good at it. I don't do it often. And the thing I hate the most about this season is I'm waking up that early and I can't sit down at my desk.
Yeah.
I can't read.
That's something I wish I would have understood when I was younger. And I did figure it out at certain times, but nowadays there's just no question. I'm getting up, I'm listening to Debussy, Chopin, some Holst, as opposed to waking up and listening to podcasts, which is what I was doing all last year. And then I was just fried because it was like half the podcasts I watched are just surfing the internet. And then so that means I'm pretty much surfing the internet, which means that's my attention span.
Yeah.
As opposed to listening to something that's drawn out. So if you listen to Mercury and Jupiter, if you listen to those, it's a lot of fun.
But I'm taking my grandmother to see the planet.
Oh.
I've had these tickets. I've been super excited about it. I love that symphony.
Is there a laser light show or something ridiculous to accompany it?
I really hope so. No, I think it's just a matinee at the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. I'm stoked, man. I remember I guess this is not an uncommon experience, but the first time I listened to that, I hated it.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And then you walk around and you start doing, and then you got to listen to it over and over again. And now it's my go-to when I want to sit down and like listen to something that's an hour and just work and like feel like my mind is energized and bouncing off the walls.
The other day I had it on and then Mercury came on and I was like, oh my God. Here, let me before we split, let me play this clip from A Serious Man for you. So I'm going to stop recording and then we'll watch that.
This has been the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.